Hey everyone, welcome to Free Assange Vigil 47.2. It has been a lot of these in a row. My name is Steve Poikin, and I am joined this morning by my host, Andrew Smith, and our special guest returning host, Taylor Hudak. And we're going to be joined with by Eleanor Goldfield here in a moment. But first, let's run down the numbers for where we're at today. It has been 3,462 days since the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange began. 415 days since he was trafficked out of the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. 100 days from today until the second phase of the extradition hearings begin. 1,092 days of incarceration for Reality Winner, making her the longest serving inmate for an Espionage Act charge. On the positive note, we have 78 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning since the decade-long WikiLeaks grand jury was dismissed. I am very pleased to bring back to the vigil a wonderful activist and artist and now documentary filmmaker, and we're going to be getting into that here in a little bit. So please welcome back to the vigil, Eleanor Goldfield. How are you today? How's it going?
I'm hanging in there.
Oh, goddamn world's burning.
Well, has been for a while. Now it's just a bit more visible.
Yeah. I know that you have a little bit of you're kind of short time today because you're going to be heading up to a BLM protest. Andrew's going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be up in Oakland tonight. And I think it's vital that there's, I guess, cross purpose in terms of these protests. We've always looked to seek a kind of uniformity when there's another large scale event going on, because it's our opinion, and I think history bears it out, that if you don't have access to the free flow of information, of unspun information, you can't do jack shit about what your preferred cause is.
Well, yeah, and I think alternative media is vital, and it's why it's so often suppressed, and why you see, I heard a lot of reports from Minneapolis about signal jamming, so that folks weren't able to live stream, folks weren't able to spread the message, which is of course the point. When cops are being filmed, and those. And that information is being shared widely, it's more difficult for them to act with impunity without anybody noticing, which is, of course, how the whole George Floyd issue came to light, is because somebody was filming it. And that's not to say that these things weren't happening. They just weren't being filmed because we didn't all have cameras in our hands. But it makes it that much more disgusting when we get to see the overt racism, the overt oppression of the system. And of course, that's why the free flow of information is so dangerous. Like I like to say, our masters have a master, and that's fear. They're very afraid of our ability to topple empires, and they're very aware of that ability. So yeah, when information, information is the new gold, and of course, people like Assange made that very clear. They wouldn't be literally trying to kill him slowly if he wasn't peddling the most priceless thing in the world, and that's information about the U.S. empire.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely right, and it's one of those things where if they're allowed to get away with this, if we can't do some sort of I guess recruitment would be the right word. While we're at these events, while we're talking to people who are there for a very different purpose, if we can't find as much commonality as possible, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us in September to generate the kind of noise that we are expecting to create when we go back to DC for the second round of Julian's extradition hearings to hold more demonstrations and events. Which, by the way, you are totally invited to be a part of those with us. We would love to see you out there and the people that you can rile up as well. Before we spend too much time on what's happening currently, I do want to make sure that we get to talk about your documentary. And we have the trailer for it that we were planning on playing it. Josh, if you can get that queued up, and then maybe Eleanor can walk us through it after the fact, or you could set it up too. Maybe set up what we're about to see in the trailer and let the folks know what's in it, and then we'll roll the clip.
Well, I think the trailer kind of speaks for itself. So
okay.
Going through this land, I feel a mixture of peace and tranquility and belonging that I don't feel in other places, but I also feel a sense of pain
I'm not sure how long the delay
loss
is
and
here.
rage, thinking about all the horrors that my people went through, as well as other indigenous people, and seeing what's been done to the land in the name of so-called progress.
If you put all of the land that had been destroyed by mountaintop removal in a straight line, it would start in Washington, D.C. at the White House. It would go all the way to San Francisco, California. It would be more than 0.8 of a mile wide. Every male in the history of my family here, since we've been here in this land, has been a coal miner until my generation.
My favorite quote goes, "You can burn their houses to the ground and they'll rebuild. But if you destroy their accomplishments, their history of who they are, then you destroy them. It's like they never existed."
Communities have just been left to decay, and they're just empty shells. They've been the foundations of communities have been completely destroyed.
It seemed to me the structure is set up to allow the stuff that you wouldn't allow if it was up to you. You feel like there's nothing you can do because you have these huge gas companies with all their resources, and then the state seems to be on their side as well.
You have to stand together to really make the difference, and I think that the miners showed us how to do that. I think that we have to continue to show the generations to come how to do that.
Everything that you do in your life, every day is political, whether you like it or whether you don't. And if you don't choose to be involved in it, then there's some son of a bitch that's dead set against anything that you believe in does get involved in it. So it's either you or them. And that's the only way, to me, that you can look at politics.
So I think this is probably a story that a lot of people can relate to throughout their communities, because just the basic concept, we don't have mountaintop removal here in Ohio, but we have extreme amounts of fracking to the point that we have an entire lower part of our state that's an environmental sacrifice zone because of it. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time and putting this story together in the way that it is, because I think it's super important that people hear it.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate y'all amplifying it. And yeah, I mean, it was really important to me. What I really wanted to do was not like tell people's stories, but be an amplifier for them to tell their stories. Because I think particularly in the South, and I'm from the South, but really in poor white communities across the country, the tendency is to have like these, sort of NGOs or like these leftists go in and be like, let me tell you your story. And it's like, no one needs to have their story told. They need a space to tell their story. And I think that it's really important, particularly in these places like West Virginia, that's been kind of treated like a throwaway state. You know, it's the number one state in terms of the opioid crisis. It's the third poorest state. It's the second most rural state. Infrastructure is horrible across the board. I think there's a tendency to just treat these people like they're a foregone conclusion. And anytime, particularly that folks on the left or progressive and radical folks do that, you leave it open for people like the KKK, and you leave it open for the extreme propagandization of racists and the like. So I think it's really important for me as a white organizer that's from the South to do this kind of outreach and show people that these folks aren't a foregone conclusion. Quite the opposite. They are proud rednecks, and that term is actually a very radical term. If you look at the history of that term, and these folks have a radical history that they're trying to re-energize in order to build a better future. And the term redneck, just to kind of circle back to that, that's become a sort of derogatory term for like anybody who's like a racist, ass, actually has its roots in the mine wars that were happening in West Virginia and Kentucky in the beginning of the 20th century. Blair Mountain, the Matewan Massacre. It was a way for folks to identify each other. They tied on red bandanas, and black and white mine workers marched together and actually fired at the barons of the coal industry. And not only were they not hanged, but they actually won some basic workers' rights. So I think and that's where the term redneck comes from. So that really speaks to the extreme propagandization that's happened in these communities. It also speaks to the importance of uncovering our radical history, not just in West Virginia, of course, but across this country and of course the world too, to recognize that we are not like the first people to battle oppression. We are not the first people to feel the need to fight for justice, that we are on a path that has, a long history, and we can use that history to direct us as we walk into the future.
The history of, I guess, unions in general, but specifically things like Matewan and the Battle of Blair Mountain are something that people never get taught as we're growing up. Like, it's either family lore, and that's going to be slanted depending on what side of the mining argument you fell on. Or it's something you have to wait until you get to an institution of higher learning before you discover like the slightest bit about it. And I've been doing something like this, like this vigil here, for quite a while now. So, I mean, my kids know about it, but it's intentional. I feel that we've separated American history from what actually happened. Unless you have access to, all of the collected writings of Howard Zinn, or you grow up in a family where Emma Goldman is a household name, you're at a disadvantage in terms of understanding what actual American history is. So I'm glad that this film is out. I hope it does well. How did the premiere go last night?
It wasn't really a premiere. It was just Lee Camp and I did a live stream to sort of celebrate the film, and also raise some money for Appalachians Against Pipelines, which is a radical group that's been fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is a proposed fracked gas pipeline. It's kind of like the parallel to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Two pipelines that would go through Virginia and West Virginia, and also parts of North Carolina. And basically the point of that, and the point of sharing this film with folks like Appalachians Against Pipelines or Earth First or things like that, is to draw these connections. The incidents that have been happening recently in the news also, of course, tie to this. It speaks to the importance, again, of doing this outreach to communities, to to highlight that solidarity. Because again, it was Black mine workers marching next to white mine workers in the beginning of the 20th century in West Virginia. I mean, that sounds absurd, but that's true. That's history. And that's what really happened. And we do have, there's a radical history of folks in the South, working across race lines and recognizing that class solidarity in order to fight back against the architects of our oppression. And so I think that now is a really powerful time to highlight that history and make it a part of the present and a part of the future as well. So yeah, I mean, it's of course very purposeful that this has been removed from history books. I mean, one of the folks in the documentary even made the point. She said that, she grew up in Matewan. She's from West Virginia. And she never got to hear about the history of the Matewan massacre, which happened in her hometown. Because the Matewan massacre is like, hey, you can pick up a gun and engage in self-defense against the architects of your oppression. Oh shit, we can't tell people that. We can't have people knowing that that's an option. So of course, it's a very, very deliberate move, so that people feel that, like, instead of having a gun to protect yourself against the state, you have a gun to protect yourself against Black people, or something absurd like that. A complete twisting and a really grotesque propagandization of the people there, to instead to continue to serve and protect the state, as opposed to serving and protecting their communities.
And you can really see.
Oh,
go ahead, Taylor.
I just want to jump in real quick. Eleanor, so when you were creating this documentary, was there anything in particular that maybe surprised you? And has your perspective at all shifted a little bit as you were creating this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Well, first of all, it surprised me that I was doing a documentary, because I didn't actually go into this intending to do a documentary. I just realized when I was down there that these stories were too dynamic to have, like, just on a weekly show, because I was still doing my weekly show at the time on Free Speech TV, and I just realized, no, this is not. It would be too shallow of a discussion if I were to just share it on the weekly show. So that was surprising, but it also surprised me how incredibly gorgeous West Virginia is. We were there in the fall. And I mean, it was almost like dropping acid. The colors were like so incredibly bright and vibrant. And I was like, whoa, and because again, when we talk about West Virginia, we talk about it like it's already been destroyed. It's already been completely ravaged by the coal and now the fracking industry. And while that's true, there is so much beauty there. And actually, Appalachia is considered to be one of the most biodiverse regions in the world still today. And so there's so much that still needs to be protected, and to talk about the place and of course the people, like they're a foregone conclusion, like they're beyond saving, not to say that you should save people, but like that they're beyond protecting or working in solidarity with, is really, really problematic, because West Virginia in that sense is a microcosm for the rest of the country. Where else in the United States could you not say, oh, it's been ravaged by corporate malfeasance. It's been ravaged by the state. The people are downtrodden, isolated. Well, that's everywhere. So if we're going to throw away West Virginia for that reason, you got to throw away everywhere in the United States and beyond. So that was really important to me to highlight that, because what I thought going in was that I was just going to be covering the destruction and the devastation. But what I ended up covering was so much beauty, not just in the places, but in the people as well, and really making that important point and that's why it's called Hard Road of Hope, because there's a lot to hope for, there's a lot to fight for, and it's just a matter of finding those intersections and those points of solidarity to work from.
So I live in Ohio, and West Virginia is the reason I love driving to Washington, D.C. If you've ever taken the trip, it's about 8 hours, but you go through the mountains diagonally. So almost the whole time through PA and West Virginia, you're in the Appalachian Mountains. And if you hit it right at the perfect time in the morning, just as like the dew is starting to settle, you can see the clouds on the mountains breathe off into the sky. And like the first time I saw that, I was like, why can't we just like make this the reason that we all exist, is to observe this fucking beauty? But that the spirit of revolutionary and radical change in West Virginia is something that, even as suppressed as it is, still exists to today. It was one of the first places in the country that the teacher strikes happened. I believe it was the first state where a statewide teacher strike happened that said, like, we're not doing this anymore. We demand better. We deserve better. And so could you talk a little bit about how that sparked other protests and other strikes, and how such a small state that people kind of overlook has always kind of been this epicenter for radical and revolutionary change?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. You know, I've talked to some of the teachers who went on strike, and they're incredibly radical. And they're an example, like, as you noted, of that radical past that's coming back, or that never really left, or died out. And I remember when I first heard that these strikes, that the teacher strikes were popping up in West Virginia, I was like, really? That's so odd, because I myself was ignorant of West Virginia's radical history. And so again, that really just speaks to how folks think about West Virginia. Like, wow, people are striking? That's odd. So yeah, and I think, like, and if you talk to a lot of folks in West Virginia, like some of the folks that I spoke to, they're super proud of those teachers. And some of the former coal miners that I spoke to, you know, they made the point that this is a continuation of that. And unfortunately, because there's been so much anti-union propaganda in the coal industry, a lot of the coal miners are not carrying on the tradition of striking and the tradition of workers' rights, and so it's falling on other industries like the teachers. But a lot of them were super, you know, a lot of the older coal miners that are now retired and are still members of the UMWA were super proud of the teachers, and really felt that they were carrying on that tradition of striking. And literally because they're teachers, but also just kind of by proxy, teaching a new generation of people that this is part of their DNA. They are the proud rednecks, and they are the people that can stage a radical resistance, and not just a resistance, but the idea of building alternatives. Like, well, what do we want? And, you know, like, what can we do instead of coal? Well, we could do green energy, or we could do, farming and stuff like this. Like, the kind of ideas that are being brought up in these radical spaces in West Virginia are incredibly inspiring, and should be considered not just within the confines of West Virginia, but far beyond as well.
And the biggest reason West Virginia really gives me hope, looking at the rest of the world, to kind of frame it in the context that we've been talking about, is if it can happen there, if people can think of an entire portion, an entire state as like this racist dump hole, essentially, and then they show themselves as, with that outside perspective, they show themselves as like, no, we are some people who can stand up. It inspires me that those people are also participating in the general strike movements that are happening, and the BLM protests that are happening, and the reopen the country protests that are happening, because we're quickly approaching a precipice where we're going to have to try to find a way to bring all of these groups together. So that way it's not one group protesting this killing and one group protesting the environmental killing, where we can all stand together and say both of these problems derive from the same root.
Yeah, and I think that's a powerful point, and it reminds me of the Appalachians Against Pipelines. They've during the fight against MVP, which is still ongoing, they've got tree sits going on, and they'll oftentimes fly banners from these tree sits with a variety of messages. You know, obviously things like water is life, and messages that are directly linked to their fight against a pipeline, but they'll also fly solidarity messages. And I think that's really, really powerful and important, because it really points out that all of these things are interconnected, right? We are all under the same system. We are all battling the same oppressive architecture of, this capitalist state. And so having a frontline fight like Appalachians Against Pipelines, flying solidarity messages like Black Lives Matter and things like that, is super important, because it is that outreach that necessary outreach that keeps us from getting just like stuck in our silos where we're like, I only do this one issue, which of course makes the, you know, the ruling class super happy because they're like, great, the world doesn't work that way. So if you want to silo yourselves, then you're really just feeding into the divide and conquer mentality that keeps us in control. And you guys stuck on this single issue of, you know, like plastic straws, and you never reach out to anybody beyond the confines of that one issue. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have moments like this where we're focused on the history of racism in this country and the history of the police in this country being descended from the slave patrol. But it also means that part of this issue, part of this organizing, has to be outreach to other places. And you know, here in DC, for instance, the action that's happening today is not just an action for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But it's also a cancel the rent protest. It's also talking about and tying in those connections of, well, you know, look, like we want the right to live, but we also have a right to live with dignity. Housing is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. And making those connections so that people know that these are all connected under the same system, and making that very clear with how we organize our protests and who we reach out to when we're building these events and actions.
Yeah, it's really important to. I often have changed my perspective on this as well when somebody kind of brought it up to me. But before people can care about the more abstract issues, such as the fight that we are all fighting for here, which is to free Assange, for the First Amendment, and for a free press, people have to have their basic needs met. They have to be able to pay their rent. They have to be able to afford a meal and to not go hungry every single day. They have to be able to have their necessities before they're able to focus on other issues. So absolutely, these things are definitely all intertwined. And that's why since we started this visual, we've always encouraged people not to take over a protest, but if you go to a protest event, if it's Pride protest, if it's Black Lives Matter, whatever the issue is, you could have your sign out for that protest. On the other side, you could have something fighting for free speech, to free Chelsea Manning, free Jeremy Hammond, Julian Assange. Again, not to take over, but just to kind of tie all the issues together.
Yeah, definitely, and to do that outreach so that when you're organizing, having those conversations with those other groups and saying like, hey, we're going to do this protest. Can you come and not like be folded into our protest, but bring your issues and make this a collective voice as opposed to, you know, we're one issue, you know, screw everything else. So yeah, it's an incredibly important point and one that gets overlooked. And unfortunately, and this is another thing that is important in the film too, because as Cole dies a very violent and destructive death, fracking is rising in West Virginia and sort of like the central and northern parts of West Virginia. And they're taking over the same tactics of the coal industry, and people who have been like really focused on mountaintop removal, for instance, aren't following this. Well, I shouldn't say not all of them, but like some folks aren't following this transition, and they think that, okay, well, once coal dies, we'll be fine. And that's not true, of course, because the water and the air and the land are being poisoned in a far more insidious way by fracking, you know, because you can't see, you know, the contamination of your water unless it's like on fire or something. You can't, if your animals start dying or your plants start dying, it's not immediately clear that it's because of fracking. There aren't always earthquakes and these like shooting explosions out of a fracked gas pipeline. It's not always so obvious. Whereas with mountaintop removal, you can't, I mean, that's obvious. Whether you feel it, whether there's coal ash raining down, whether there's, you know, just the visual of a decapitated mountain. So it's really important to follow the death of coal into the rise of fracking and recognize that too is connected. And this sort of resource colony that West Virginia was founded as is being transferred from coal and timber now to the gas and oil industry. And you know, making that kind of outreach, and how all of this is, of course, connected to the opioid crisis in West Virginia, and how folks are really struggling because of isolation, because of pain, physical and emotional and mental, and how these are connected to the status of West Virginia as a resource colony.
Real quick, I have a couple of thank yous from super chats on my page. So Kat Terrell and Anthony Reyes and Rob Juno, thank you very much. The super chats that come in while we're doing vigils will be rolled over into our GoFundMe for our DC trip. So I'm not going to keep any of that. I'm going to make sure that we all get to put it towards getting us to DC. I know you've got to head out. There was a statistic at the front end of that trailer that said if you took the like the mass or the area of mountaintop removals and laid it end to end, it would go from, did he say DC to California?
From the White House to San Francisco, and it'd be 0.8 of a mile wide.
That's gross.
It's disgusting. And that's just mountaintop removal. That's not counting the more than 100 years of traditional mining where they burrowed straight into the mountain. Mountaintop removal is kind of like fracking, where we already got all the easy to reach coal. Now we have to get the coal seams that are underneath literally the head of the mountain. Same thing with fracking. We got all the easy to reach oil. Now we've got to literally frack into the rock. And so that's just mountaintop removal. And I think that kind of visual is really important. And I also, in the film, there's also shots, there's aerial footage that I got, because you can't really, some of these mountaintop removal sites are 16 to 20 miles across. And that doesn't make sense when you're driving through the mountains, because a lot of times too, they'll have like a line of trees that look so pretty. And then behind it is this massive soar on the landscape of a mountaintop removal site. So a lot of times you can't even see it from the road. And even if you could, you can't appreciate how large that is. You really have to see it from the air. So I included some of that footage so people can really see what this looks like when you decapitate mountain ranges.
And that's such an effective way of framing it, decapitating mountains. Personal friends of mine, Beth Stevens and Annie Sprinkle, married Gully Mountain in West Virginia. They are self-proclaimed ecosexuals, and they go and they marry causes, and they were trying to prevent the mountaintop removal of Gully Mountain. It's a really cool documentary if you ever get the chance to watch it. It's called Goodbye Gully Mountain. I know you got a split. I want to thank you very much for hanging out with us for a little bit today. I hope that your event or the event you're attending is successful and nobody gets hurt. First and foremost, we're going to spend a little time after you leave talking about like being a street medic 101 and things that you can bring to protests with you in case there's tear gas. First and foremost, though, real quick, you take a squirt bottle, you fill half of it with Malox, you fill half of it with water, and that is your anti-tear gas, your tear gas removal right there. It works like a charm, and you don't have to smell like vinegar. But Eleanor, please tell everybody where they can find all of your stuff. And yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you all for again your continued work with the vigil for Assange. Such an important issue, such an important action that you all keep promoting and keep doing. So thank you all for your labor on that. Folks can see my film over at hardroadofhope.com. Yeah, it's available on a sliding scale there. You can also see the trailers and more information. So again, thank you all so much for having me, and look forward to joining you next time.
Thanks for coming on.
So let's kind of stay on the protests that have been happening and going on. I know that we've got some footage of Minneapolis from the other day. If that can just kind of go up in the background, I would like to make sure that people are safe while all of this is happening, I mean, we've got a militarized terror squad in our nation's police forces, and with the addition of lots of agent provocateurs to these protests, we've seen some really shady shit go down. There's a video up on Twitter right now of a very expensive storefront in a building where someone just rolled up a pallet of bricks to. And the clip is the kid going, "Yeah, this is a setup. Don't go for this. Like, we all know better, but just in case you don't, this is some bullshit right here, and don't fall for this." You got to keep your head when you're in an environment of chaos like that, and there are multiple things that you have to look out for. Number one is shoes. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember like Grateful Dead parking lots or Fish parking lots, but one of the easiest way to tell who your undercovers are is they're all wearing cop shoes. If it looks like a pair of cop boots, it's a cop. Like, don't get yourself out of that situation. Walk away, leave, go somewhere else. I've been seeing a number of pictures rolling around of an undercover who's wearing a beanie, but he's still got the earpiece in, and you can see just enough of that little white cord running down to where he's able to communicate. Watch for people who are putting their hands up to their ear frequently and mumbling. Yeah, I mean, keep your wits about you. It does get fucked up when the tear gas starts flowing and you know, cops in riot gear start marching towards you. If you are the type of person to panic in those situations, then I highly recommend that you don't put yourself in that situation and stay at a medical tent. Stay somewhere where you can help pass out supplies. You can if you have to go the vinegar route to get tear gas out of you, then dilute it a little bit and get it on a rag. And that will be much more effective than like just straight up pouring vinegar on you. But the Malox and the water in a 50-50 mix is so much gentler to your senses.
You know what, Steve? I've heard about the boots thing as well. You can tell because they all wear the same shoes. And that was from somebody who visited the United States, isn't from the US, but visited and made that same observation. So this is real stuff, guys. It sounds, maybe if you're not, too aware of it, it sounds like, oh, this won't happen to me. This won't happen at a protest I'm at. No, it will. Just yesterday, Max Blumenthal posted this video. I encourage everybody to watch it if you have not seen it. Basically, he catches an infiltrator, provocateur in particular, walking to a protest. He gets out of what looks like a undercover police vehicle, and the guy walks out. He says he's from CNN. He's clearly not from CNN. There's an exchange between this man and Max, and then Max actually goes back to the police vehicle, questions the people who were in the car, clearly cops, and they just don't answer his questions. They kind of dodge the questions. He asks them, hey, are you with CNN? Very interesting, very telling. Everybody should watch this. You have to educate yourself on these issues, or you could really end up in a lot of trouble. I'm really serious about this. You can end up in quite a bit of trouble. They are there with the intent of putting you in jail and to make your movement look bad. That is not to scare people or make them feel frightened and not want to go. You should still go and still care about these issues and do something about it. But you need to be aware that this is something that happens and to not just kind of turn a blind eye to it.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just want to read a quote here. This was from a speech that Martin Luther King gave, and I think it's literally one of the most important things anytime a situation like this produces itself.
Can you read it with feeling?
I will try.
With feeling.
It is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irreprehensible of me to do that. And at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellion to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And every time that a situation like this sparks, it's not because it's something new. It's not because there's a new thing like, wow, we all just realized that this is happening. It's because this has been ongoing for years and years. Our government has literally paid to make TV shows like Cops, to produce generations of police officers that believe they have the right to act this way. So for everyone that's out there right now, I just want to say thank you, because in this moment, so many people realize that may have always taken the side of the police before, that there are deeper, larger issues, even if they're ultimately ignored by society, because in this moment, they can't be ignored any longer.
And I'm going to piggyback off of that. Kevin Gostola put up an MLK quote the other day. And by the way, Kevin Gostola will be on Tuesday's vigil. Looking very forward to that. MLK said urban riots must now be recognized as a durable social phenomena. They may be deplored, but they are there and they should be understood. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters themselves are not seeking to seize territory or to attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. They're a distorted form of social protest. The looting, which is their principal feature, serves many functions. It enables the most enraged and deprived individual to take hold of consumer goods with ease. With the ease that comfortable white people do by opening their wallets. Often the people who loot don't even want what they take. They want the experience of taking. But most of all, alienated from society and knowing that society cherishes property above people, he is shocking it by abusing property rights. There are thus elements of emotional catharsis in the violent act. And this may explain why most cities in which riots have occurred have not had a reputation, even though the causative conditions remain. It is also noteworthy the amount of physical harm done to white people other than police is infinitesimal. So I mean, we got to keep our heads when all of this is happening. One of the first things that you see are really comfortable motherfucking white people going, well, why are they looting? That's not respectful. Why are they destroying their own neighborhoods? And like,
I don't even think that that's the response right now. I think,
dude, up until CNN in Atlanta got destroyed yesterday, fuck it, every single right winger that I personally know on Twitter was doing that exact same, like, well, look at these idiots breaking their own neighborhoods kind of shit.
I mean, to me, really, all you have to do is watch the video. I haven't watched the video. I've had people describe the video to me, but that it just changed. It's like collateral murder. It just changes an opinion when people see it.
It should.
Yeah.
Straight the fuck up. Do you want to get into some of these let's, you know what, while we're on this,
let's start with the drone.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah. So I believe this came out yesterday. It's about a day old news at this point. ICE's, or Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, I believe, right? ICE?
Yeah, but this is Customs and Border Patrol.
Customs and Border, that's who I was trying to think of. That's why I asked. Customs and Border Patrol was caught using a Predator drone, supposedly unarmed, to fly above Minneapolis yesterday. This is high-tech, high-grade military equipment used to surveil, target, and kill terrorists in foreign countries. That for some reason, terrorists, let me preface, in foreign countries, and for some reason, we have a domestic police force that in no way should be intervening in a civil unrest case because it has nothing to do with borders and customs, is deploying military grade equipment in civilian airspace specifically to monitor people of the United States. And I think that that is one of the most fucking disgusting things. And not that it's new, but that it's literally like the next step from this is looking like the Gaza border, where you have random people that will get knocked off by police officers through sniper fire or other means, and you will have drones dropping tear gas canisters from 20, 40, 60,000 feet in the air. That's the next escalation of this. And that fucking, it's terrifying.
Just to get into the article a little bit, an aircraft using the call sign CBP-104 took off from Grand Forks Air Base in North Dakota, where the Border Patrol has drones stationed at around 10:10 a.m. Eastern Time, reaching Minneapolis and entering a hexagon-shaped holding pattern at 20,000 feet over the city at 11:47 a.m. At around 1:15 Eastern, it began heading back to Grand Forks. Minneapolis is not inside the 100 air mile border zone where the Border Patrol has jurisdiction, an area that encompasses just shy of 2/3 of the nation's population. Let's jump down a little bit. There are people, there's a flight watching community. That is a Latin character that I am unfamiliar with. At any rate, they spotted the drone. They're letting people know. The fact that they put up a Predator drone, armed or unarmed, and all of the signal interference that's been going on with people who are trying to live stream these protests, it speaks to the level of fear that Eleanor was talking about when she said our masters have a master and it's fear. You don't unleash a Predator drone over a city out of your airspace jurisdiction if you're not shit your pants afraid of the people on the ground. And that's the kind of energy we need to harness, and we need to make sure that that carries with us as we travel to DC.
Yeah. People shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. Hands down, point blank. And this is a wonderful example of that.
Frightening example too. I want to go to this Black Agenda Report article for a couple of reasons. One, because this is still the Free Assange Vigil, and we should probably, spend a bit more time on that. But there's a really remarkable parallel that the writer of this piece, Patrick Anderson, lays out here. And it's, again, we started off the show talking about the American history that Americans don't know. If I were to ask you and Taylor if you'd ever heard of George Jackson before, what would your response be?
No.
No.
Okay.
Fortunately.
So let's go through this a little bit. Where the fuck did it go? There we go. Anderson starts.
Point real quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The fact that we aren't knowing, certain figures in our history, this is all because of who writes history. And that's something that I'm really concerned about too when it comes to, Julian's case and other cases. Now, Craig Murray as well, his hearings on June 10th related to his publishing. I just worry about how these people are being remembered in history, because we know who writes history, and that is why a lot of our perspectives are skewed, because we're really not being told the truth about what happened. You have to really actively go and search that truth. So that's why it's so important to be talking about these things. I just wanted to make that point real quick. You could go ahead, Steve.
No, you're absolutely right. So in the summer of 1971, Julian Assange was born in Queensland, Australia, amid surging protests against the Vietnam War. Weeks later, George Jackson was murdered by correctional officers inside San Quentin, California's oldest prison. Jackson spent his entire adult life behind bars, a political prisoner of the U.S. empire. Today, Julian Assange faces a similar fate, a lifetime of imprisonment for daring to expose the empire's war crimes. Incarceration is the inevitable outcome for those who dare to challenge imperial power. For as Jackson wrote presciently in Blood in My Eye, the ultimate expression of law is not order, it's prison. Because Jackson was a revolutionary Marxist who advocated armed revolutionary violence to take over the state, and Assange is a cypherpunk anarchist who advocates technology-supported nonviolence to curtail state power, it may seem that the two activists have little in common. But by understanding Assange and WikiLeaks through the lens of George Jackson's revolutionary philosophy, we can better appreciate how both Jackson and Assange dedicated themselves to challenging the U.S. empire in the name of self-determination for all peoples of the world. And I just like, real quick, because this is a longer article and I don't want to like live inside of it for the rest of the vigil, even though it is tremendous, and I really do hope that you guys go and read this. Is out of the Black Agenda Report. The article itself is about 2 weeks old, and the author of it, Patrick Anderson, will be on my show soon. I don't have a date yet specifically, but I am going to have him on so we can have this conversation at length. It's important to remember that finding, I guess, flatly false on the face of the charge is a very old trick of the U.S. empire. They'll find something like, well, in Julian Assange's case, trying to apply the U.S. Espionage Act to an Australian citizen in order to do that and have him incarcerated. In George Jackson's case, where did my thing go? I just had this. I did. I
did just want to clarify something though, because early in the article it said that he was that Julian was an anarchist. If I remember properly, I think he's actually more of a libertarian than an anarchist. Not that there's a whole hell of a lot of a difference, but there's basic structural components that lead to fundamental ideology differences.
Are misguided anarchists.
Anarchist with a Ridge wallet.
But you're right, Andrew. I do believe that he was apolitical, and was vocal in that. I could be wrong, but I think you're right because I remember hearing this. But he definitely, I remember hearing something about him being libertarian.
But that's besides the point, because this article is absolutely beautiful. I just wanted to point that out. But there's a paragraph towards the bottom that it says, interestingly, there is a way in which the structure of WikiLeaks parallels Jackson's principles of guerrilla warfare. Its mobility is enabled by the use of computers and hidden servers in various jurisdictions around the world. Its infiltration is embodied by whistleblowers who leak classified documents. Its ambushes are its publications, given that the empire never knows when and where they are coming from. Its camouflage is cryptography, preventing the empire from finding its source or its servers. So I think
real quick, I get a $5 super chat from Brian Jones. He says riots going on in Seattle today at noon and Fifth Avenue. Film the protests and the riots because the police turned off their body cameras yesterday. So this is one of those things where being a citizen journalist, like the 17-year-old girl that filmed George Floyd being murdered is so vital, because even if you can't live stream, you should be able to record and then go 120 yards away and upload. Those signal jammers have a fairly limited range of effectiveness.
And using different cloud storage softwares is a great way to move videos around, whether it's Dropbox, Google Drive if you have to. It's a Google product, so it's not ultimately recommended. But because videos are a lot harder to move around than people realize until they try to do it, like mailing them out to people is sometimes difficult. So if you can put them on a cloud storage software, or just store on your computer and be able to email the links out, that generally works a little bit better than trying to put it on YouTube or on Facebook after the fact, to be able to help proliferate it to other people. Not that you shouldn't, because you should still put them on YouTube and Twitter, but also to get it around in the fullest context. Cloud storage.
Fair enough. Oh, and this is probably a good time to remind people that a friend of the vigil, Sean O'Brien, is holding classes now on how best to remain anonymous, become anonymous, and secure the equipment that you communicate on. That includes the ability to send video over. Yeah, that's privacysafe.tech, and that's Sean O'Brien, our buddy.
And we had a question in the chat last week that I personally think is super important to talk about, because especially right now, and it was, what would a movement look like to actually free Julian Assange? And you can remove that, what would a movement look like to actually, and insert your own thing there. What would a movement look like to get racial equality? What would a movement look like to abolish prisons? What would a movement look like for Medicare for all? What have you? The answer is heavily encrypted and done outside of standard communication systems like Twitter and Facebook. So I think signing up and working with Sean over at Privacy Safe is super, super, super important, because that's the best way to prevent the intelligence communities from knowing where you are and what you're doing, is taking, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours to encrypt your devices and then move forward from there.
Yeah, and his classes are like anywhere from like $2 to $8.
Yeah, I think it's so cool that he's doing this. So cool. But unfortunately, at the same time, well, number one, you should absolutely be taking these measures, taking these classes if you can. It's just smart to do so, because it does make it more difficult to interfere in your communications. But do know that if you are really in more extreme cases, a person who is of high interest, they can just get into your phone, to be honest. So to be really careful, because they can do it, but I believe they have to do it like on a targeted basis. And again, this is more extreme cases. I don't want to freak anybody out, but absolutely encrypt your communications. That's how we, have continued to communicate, and it's just a smart thing to do. And then we'll probably put more information about his classes, right?
Oh yeah,
we'll get something up on the website.
We'll put on Twitter for you guys, so you know when to kind of tune into that.
Jesus Christ, I'm getting the Rona.
So while Steve's slowly dying on the other side of the country, I'm going to give a moment here to shout out our action link. I'm going to drop it in the chat again. This month we've been focusing on trying to build bridges with organized labor and other labor groups, and this is just in honor of May Day, May 1st, being the International Labor Day of essentially the whole world except the US, because we're fucking idiots. So I'm going to drop the link into the chat. Please take a moment to send the emails, to make some phone calls, and to share it out for other people to do so too. There is also petitions in there too for you to sign and share. So please get that link around and take some action yourself. What were you trying to say before you slowly started dying, Steve?
I don't even know, man. The adrenaline rush combined with the coughing and the brain cell. Yeah, I got my ass kicked at work this week, man. I just spent since lockdown, just doing activism and doing the shows, and I went back to work this week, and my boss is recovering from a hernia surgery, so I'm doing like 100% of the lifting, and I got out of shape. I got me some like quarantine 15 going on. A little pudgy, man. Been eating like fucking gummy bears and bullshit food a little bit. So I'm feeling beat. Like just like,
Quarantine 15. I think that's probably one of the best things I've heard in a while.
all right.
Do we want to jump into the Australian Institute article here real quick? And then
Sure.
I think
And oh
that's
my
our-
God, we're gonna have a show under 2 hours this week.
I know. I'm very sad. I missed the 5-hour long vigils of droning on with somebody.
You
We had a
can
lot.
burn in hail.
When we had when we had vigils though that were really long, we had a lot to talk about, and we would have like 5 guests on at a time, so it would go by very quickly.
That
Now-
shit was insane though, dude. Like nobody should have to have a panel where there's like 8, 10, 12 people on it. That's fucking painful.
It was like
Hey,
one
we
of
did
our
great though.
too. It's always Andrew's idea, guys, by the way.
Yeah.
It's
Andrew
always
wants 30 motherfuckers
it's
in
like,
here.
this person and this person and this person. We're like, I don't know. But hey, I think we did do a good job though. One of our first vigils, we had literally 5 people, and it went pretty smoothly.
I think it was actually 6 guests and 4 hosts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Just painful. All right, let's jump into this here real quick, man. This is out of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. Publisher Julian Assange became an instant celebrity. In 2011, he received the popular vote for Time Magazine's Person of the Year, became Le Mans Man of the Year, and was repeatedly nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Robert Mann called him the most consequential Australian of the time and one of the best known and most respected human beings on Earth. Yet successive Australian governments have refused to intervene on Assange's behalf, making him, as the New Yorker reported, a man without a country. What happened to him could happen to anyone, and that's apparently the point the 3 Anglo allies want to make. He's talking, of course, about the US, UK, and Australia. American politics, without explaining how an Australian could commit treason against the US, called Assange a traitor and wanted him dead. Both Republicans and Democrats labeled Assange a, quote, high-tech terrorist. The U.S. closed down internet donations to WikiLeaks after allegations of rape against Assange by 2 Swedish women were reported. He offered to be interviewed in Stockholm and in London with no result. Both women withdrew their claims, and the Swedish prosecutors dropped the case, although their UK counterparts pressured them to put it. It is worth noting that the actual investigation had very little to do with these 2 women. In fact, one of them had discovered that her statements had been altered, and that this was 100% an investigation that Swedish authorities wanted to pursue, and not any alleged, I guess, victims would be the word.
And I think Stefania does a great job doing the Freedom of Information Acts, or the Swedish equivalent, to get the information and the truth about what was happening in Sweden at the time. And there's a lot of records that show there was a lot of investigators in Sweden that didn't even inherently want to have this case go forward, but it was pressure from the UK that forced the investigations forward as a way to literally just smear him internationally.
So let's hop back into this. The British Foreign Office Minister, Sir Alan Duncan, called Assange a, quote, miserable little worm in Parliament. The British media weighed in, calling WikiLeaks a disruptor of everything the West held dear and Assange a nihilist. The title of Alex Gibney's 2013 mockumentary film, We Steal Secrets, The Story of WikiLeaks, sounded like an admission from Assange, but those words were spoken in the film by Michael Hayden, former NSA director, about his own agency. In step with their American and British colleagues, Australian ministers and media were quick to join the pile-on against Assange, though Julia Gillard couldn't name his crime. Tanya, what is that? Really? Pilbersek said he had damaged world security. Assange broke his bail in Britain, fearing extradition to the US, and for that was called paranoid and a coward by his former collaborators in the media. But he knew a grand jury was investigating him, something American authorities denied until charges were filed in Alexandria in December 2017, and a court error revealed it was true. With Assange in diplomatic asylum in the Embassy of Ecuador, the CIA used UC Global, a Spanish security firm, to surveil what he did there, everything he said to his friends and lawyers, and connections to their phones. As British police dragged him out in April 2019, Assange mouthed to the cameras, "I told you so." Since then, he's been in solitary confinement in London's high-security Belmarsh prison, where at least one murder has recently occurred and at least 2 inmates have contracted COVID-19. I'm going to pause there for a minute because this is really the first time a Five Eyes country outlet has admitted that not just one, but 2 people, at least 2 people in Belmarsh have died from this virus, and they've discussed the fact that a murder took place in there. This is something we don't get to see normally in our media, and that fucking kills me, y'all. Like, it really does. I can't express not my disappointment, but my fury, my rage at U.S. media outlets and the people that buy into that shit. Like, I get that propaganda is a hell of a drug, but like, it's possible to step down your intake. Remember, guys, when I pause dramatically, that's your cue to join the conversation.
I forgot. But so,
I know it's been a while, T.
Yeah. So being susceptible to propaganda, just to kind of pick up on that point, something that we have to be aware of, because even as we go into this more and more, people will literally just make shit up. They'll put out fake articles on the internet. They'll try to find ways to introduce new bullshit talking points, but also the same repeated ones, like Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning caused people to get hurt. And having a working understanding of the situation as it was and as it is going forward really gives you a good way to counter those talking points politely, because it's all come out. There was no one hurt during Chelsea Manning's releases. There was no charges for the rape. It was literally concocted. There was no DNA on the condom that they tested. Just basic things like that. And if you're out on the street doing activism and someone brings up one of these smears against Julian, feel free to address it as politely as you can. But at the end of the day, remember that people have been inundated with years of propaganda, and it may just be, okay, I'm going to just debunk this one and then keep on moving instead of making it a fight with this person about it.
Yeah, there are some people that you just won't be able to reason with, but it is worth trying, absolutely. And then also, too, another good point is to also remember that when it comes to maybe political figures or people in the media, it's okay to be a little bit skeptical of people when they do kind of a 180 flip, but it's important to also be willing to embrace people who maybe at one time held some really, really distorted and negative viewpoints on WikiLeaks as an organization, on Assange and others. It's important to be willing to embrace those people and to be like kind and polite as well, and just calmly debunk the smears, because again, the facts are on our side in this case, 100%.
And here's the other thing, and this is something that Elizabeth Voss said on Slow News Day Wednesday evening. Like, we're not proud or happy about being right about any of this shit. It would be preferable to not to be completely wrong about a global surveillance state, about the Five Eyes countries, about the ongoing persecution and torture of Julian Assange. It would be preferable for that to be not a statement of fact, but it is. And you're not going to see any of us take a victory lap when the facts bear out what we've been saying. That not only is that not in anybody's nature, but it further alienates people who are just coming on board. And I think it's important to remember that, like, just because you're right doesn't mean you have to be a smug prick about it. Because it takes a complete breaking down of somebody's worldview to go from Julian Assange is a criminal and a high-tech terrorist who deserves to be imprisoned because he's he committed treason against the United States. Like, just to untangle that web of shit, even by a simple question, how can an Australian citizen commit an act of treason against the US? Like, that is enough to make people's brains fizzle out. But if you can get past that, and if you can get past that as respectfully as possible, the opportunity for you to have a much more beneficial conversation has presented itself, and you need to handle that with a modicum of class.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is not an issue where you can, it's an issue that is very broad, in a sense that what Steve was saying is exactly right. It really does require you to completely shift your thinking, because it requires you from going from, and this is a very basic overview here, but going from perhaps the idea that the government is right, and you may have more of a very patriotic and a patriotic view and a pro-America view, to realizing that in fact governments do lie, that the military-industrial complex is real, and coming to these truths is a very big adjustment for a person. So yeah, that's a really good point, Steve. It's not something where it's like, well, I'm not even gonna make any comparisons to a movement because it'll be taken out of context, but this is something where you do have to change your worldview. Can't you see, if I made any sort of comparison, it would be taken out of context, so I'm not gonna go there. But this is not like a very basic voter type issue.
Yeah, because it comes down to essentially challenging people's, in so many terms, like philosophical religion and viewpoint on the entire world. Because whether they're super pro-Trump, super pro, I don't know, Bernie, or whatever's on the other side now, when you talk to them about the issue surrounding Julian specifically, none of their political heroes support it. So when you're at political rallies and you talk about Julian, it creates this really weird dynamic, because people that are in favor of X, Y, or Z that also support Julian, when you ask them, well, why hasn't blah, 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 or why hasn't this person done X, Y, and Z for Julian yet? There's always that moment of, well, and so even people that support Julian have these strange barriers, because the talking head figures that the MSM put in front of them don't talk about Julian and don't defend him. So it creates this super strange situation of, are people going to pick their hero, or are people going to stand up for fundamental principles?
There's a statement in my chat from Bobby Foxglove that says, how can we not be confused? Just for instance, when you can find equal amounts of info on whether or not to wear a mask, it's insane. It is. You're right. And this is intentional. Like January or February of last year, I had Jared Beck on my show, who will be back on my show tomorrow, by the way. So always a fantastic conversation with that guy. But he gave me something to think about, and I've turned it into a theory that I am now going to turn into a book. and it's called manufactured confusion. The idea behind it, Bobby, and anyone else who hasn't heard me go off on this yet, the idea behind it is that in 1989, Noam Chomsky wrote Manufacturing Confusion or Consent. Manufacturing consent is over 30 years old now. Both the idea and the reality that consent has been manufactured. If it wasn't prior to the ink drying on the Patriot Act, certainly after, consent has been manufactured. We are just now, with the protests and riots that are taking place all across the country, seeing that consent start to dissipate, which I feel is a very positive sign. But that means that for at least a decade now, if not 20 full years, the role of the media has been to manufacture confusion. And that's why you see so much conflicting information about COVID, or about wearing a mask, or even about which is the right way to protest. That's why everything is politicized. You have to have a team red or a team blue perspective about something, even if you're both unwittingly parroting the same narrative, just spun from a different direction. So the confusion is 100% intentional. And that's why what we do here at Action for Assange is try to get people the fuck out of their partisan mindset. This is a post-partisan organization. We're of the opinion that you can't even have a conversation about policy or politics until you've got real information in front of you. Primary source material, primary source documentation, that you get to decide how you feel about it without being told how to feel or think about it by any fucking talking head, including us. Not that we're talking heads necessarily. We actually go and, do activism and shit. But you get what I'm saying, right? Please tell me in the chat that you understand where I'm coming from with this. The other problem is that because everything is politicized, because everything has to be couched around, team red or team blue or team progressive, because of that, the same energy that goes into being a fundamentalist Christian, or a fundamentalist Muslim, or a fundamentalist Hindu, has been transferred into the political space. Largely a secular country, especially where politics are concerned, especially in the center and on the center left. If you've ever tried to talk to a progressive about the problems with Bernie Sanders, it is the exact same thing as talking to a fundamentalist Christian about why the Bible may be factually inaccurate. They shut down and they retreat into their...
And the same thing, to be fair, the same thing for Trump supporters, because there are revolutionary Trump supporters, like people that want to see the system crumble, that believe Trump is doing it. And you point out the expansion of the surveillance state, the torture of Julian Assange, and all of these other things that go against what they believe. And it's like, well, no, because that's just how you play the game. It's 5-dimensional chess. And that's what everyone in every one of these religious political spheres says is, oh, well, they're just playing 5D chess. Well, no one's making any moves against the international surveillance community. I think that's
dead air.
I was actually going to say, I don't know what we have left to cover, but I'm pretty sure that's everything. Yeah, I think we got done half an hour early today, guys.
No, Anthony, that was Alan Rickman, not Alan Watts. That was the robot in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Alan Rickman, of course, famous because of the movie Dogma, not because he was Snape in Harry Potter's. Yeah. And rest in peace, Alan Rickman, by the way. Yeah, let's wrap up.
You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. You can find us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. I apologize about the very loud car sound if you guys can hear that. You can also find us online at action4assange.com. YouTube, Rockfin, Twitch, wherever you're watching from, Facebook. I just want to say thank you very much. And a big thank you to Eleanor Goldfield, because that is a beautiful documentary and she is an absolutely wonderful person.
Yeah, like Andrew said, a big thanks to Eleanor Goldfield for coming on today. We really appreciate her time. Guys, just remember what I said earlier about the, provocateurs. Don't get in trouble. Know it's real and be aware of what to look out for. So I also do want to make note, you guys haven't seen me on the vigils for quite a while. The last time I was on was May 3rd for World Press Freedom Day. The reason is that I have taken on some other work, which takes up quite a bit of my time. I love what I do. I work for Activism Munich. I get to report on Assange's case. I put out videos as frequently as I can. Every time there's an update on the case or something new to cover, I make a video about it. I also do interviews with various people. It's really great, and that is on Activism Munich. Like I said, it takes up a lot of my time. Like, for example, I still haven't gone to bed since yesterday. So it's just a lot of work, but again, I love what I do. I do edit my videos, and I have the full ability to not only report on Assange's case, but also really advocate for him as well. And that's something that's so important to me. And I'm still with Action for Assange. I just have a little bit more of a behind the scenes role because of my time. But when I can make it on, like today, I'm going to come on and guest co-host because this is my home, and I love these guys. They're my friends. I look forward to meeting Steve, Josh, and Kimber one day. I have yet to meet them in person. I look forward to that. So I will be on as frequently as I can. And if you guys do want to check out my work, again, that is on Activism Munich. I have a report coming out tomorrow, Germany time. So tonight for some of you guys on the West Coast, but that's where you can find my stuff. And do support these guys for their second round in DC. It's really important that these actions take place, and these guys work their asses off when they were there. I was not there, of course. I was in London, but I was coordinating with them, and let me tell you, there was so much work put into it. And do help them out. Any amount counts. Any amount is valued and appreciated and really helps this cause. And if you could be there, please go. Please make it there. You don't have to stay the whole time. Of course, it's 3 weeks, but if you can make it for a weekend or, for the day or for the evening, make it out there. The more people there, the better. I think it's going to be really, really important that we show that support in DC and show that we do not stand for this. So thank you guys for watching and for tuning in, and it was really great to be back.
It was great to have you back with us, T. I miss you during these. I do. My name is Steve Poikin, and I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find that here on the YouTubes by typing Slow News Day Podcast into your search bar. I'm also on the Rockfin. If you have been a patron of my show on Patreon, I am asking that you stop doing that and instead sponsor the Rockfin channel. That way you get access to everyone on Rockfin's premium content, not just mine. And it's a way to consolidate the money that you spend on alternative media. Of course, if you want to support people individually, please do that. But if you're on Slow News Day's Patreon, kill that monthly expenditure. Go support the Rockfin, please. Tomorrow, Jared Beck will be in the house. That will be a fantastic conversation. I have really incredible guests lined up for the next several days. I am back working mostly full-time now, so my morning shows aren't going to be happening, but I'm still going to, with the vigils, try and put out 5 shows a week. I love you guys. Thank you for being a part of this with us. Thank you to my co-hosts. Thank you to Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s and Mean Panda with the graphics. We appreciate the fuck out of you guys. So please know that. And we will see you Tuesday when our guest will be Kevin Gastola. And I'm sure we will have plenty to talk to him about. In the meantime, good luck to us all.